Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our live session on Masters Speak. For those of you who are connecting with us for the first time, I would like to share that we have conceptualized this program to draw upon the wisdom of great leaders, thinkers, and professionals who have in their careers helped build great organizations or transform lives of people they have worked with, and that too despite all adversities and tough times. We are living in uncertain yet interesting times, as I would say, and how things will shape up post COVID could leave many of us guessing. So, how might we be prepared for a different tomorrow? And what should we be focusing on to emerge stronger from this crisis situation? Many questions amongst our audience. So, to answer some of your questions, we have amongst us Rishad Tobaccowala. He's an author, speaker, and advisor with 4 decades of experience in helping people, organizations, and teams reinvent themselves to remain relevant in changing and challenging times such as these. Rishad was also named by Business Week as one of the top business leaders for his pioneering innovation, and Time magazine dubbed him as one of the 5 marketing innovators. So that's an awesome lineage over there. Rishad has also written a book which recently has been published by Harper Collins. It's called Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data. And if you already don't have that book, I would recommend that after you hear Rishad speak, the first thing you must do is to reach out and get that book. But let me just warn you, the book is not available in stores. It's already out of stock, but you can still find it on Kindle app, and I'm sure it will be available sometime soon. But till then, you can go to Kindle app and grab the book. I'm sure you'll find it very, very insightful. I must also add, Rishad is the chairman of Tobaccowala Foundation, which helps over 10,000 people gain better access to health and education in India. So that's Rishad for you, and we are very, very fortunate to have Rishad amongst us today. So without much ado, I will hand it over to Rishad for him to share his thoughts with all of us. Rishad, thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Rakesh, and thank you to everyone in the audience for joining this evening, your time, and morning, my time in Chicago. So as Rakesh mentioned, one of the things that I focus on, and I focused on for the last maybe 2 decades, is how to help people reinvent themselves in transformative times. And in the early decades, the transformative times really came from changing technology, changing globalization, and changing demographic shifts. And those were the 3 big changes. And I kept reminding people that globalization, which had started since 1991, had basically brought 2 billion people out of poverty, including many, many people in India. The demographic shifts was giving rise to Africa and Asia, or even in the United States. If you're under 21 years old, you're a Caucasian minority, which is in the United States, under 21, Caucasians are less than 50% of the population. So significant demographic shifts, and as everybody knows, significant technological shifts due to the internet, which gave rise to things like search and e-commerce, which in the United States gave rise to big companies like Amazon and Google. The rise then of social and mobile, which is sort of the second connected age, which gave rise to companies like Facebook / WhatsApp / Instagram and Twitter, and of course, Apple, and companies that reinvented themselves for these particular ages, which is Microsoft. And those 5, for instance, are the most dramatic companies in the West. In India, we've seen exactly those implications, where India today is the largest market in usage for Facebook, as well as for LinkedIn, and increasingly for Google. And clearly, you all have all read about the 9.9% sort of investment in geo platforms by Facebook as they try to figure out ways to monetize WhatsApp without advertising. So clearly, dramatic shifts going on because of technological shifts, globalization, and demographic shifts. What one did not anticipate, and what one has basically, all of us are experiencing, I am locked down in Chicago. You all are locked down wherever you all are in. Most of you all are obviously in the Indian market, and you're all locked down there. And many of the people internationally, depending on the country, are in various stages of lockdown. And so we've had this major health crisis occur, which has also led to very transformative times. So I'm going to basically focus on a few things on how to think about change, both change driven by globalization, change driven by demographic shifts, change driven by technology, on which in addition now you have this dramatic event. So first, let me begin in trying to get a sense of what this is like, or at least a guess of what this is like compared to anything else that has gone before. Now, I did not, and I am old, I'm 60 years old, but that means I was not alive in 1917, 1918, when we had the Great Plague, and I was not alive in 1929 when we had the beginning of the Great Depression. I have been alive since the 1987 crash, .com, 9/11, 2008, 2009 recession. And in all those years, I was actually working in business. And how does this event compare to all of those events? Because a lot of people say, this is like it's a Great Recession to whatever it is. My basic belief is it's completely different. And that's the first thing I would suggest all of you all, whether you all are looking at this from an individual perspective, small business perspective, medium business perspective, large business perspective, that do not believe that this is something that you can learn from the past and think it's going to work. And here's why. Everything that occurred in the past basically was either a financial crisis, like the .com bust or the recession, the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, or it was a political slash crisis like 9/11, or in the previous SARS and Ebola, which was much smaller, it was a health crisis. What we have here is a health crisis, an economic crisis, a political crisis, and a social crisis all happening at the same time, which is number one. And number two, it is happening to everybody in the world. While even the Great Recession spared countries like Poland and New Zealand and Australia and impacted different people differently, this is impacting everybody in the world all at the same time across all these frontiers. But most importantly, it is making people behave differently for 30 to 60 to 90 days. So, in India, by May 3rd, most of you all in India will have been under lockdown for about 5 weeks. I'm in Chicago, where the lockdown began. We were the first city a few hours after San Francisco. So we've been under lockdown for about 6 weeks. And what you're looking at is, in most parts of the world, 30, 60, 90 days of some form of lockdown. Now, if you remember, one of the key things that we see out here at the bottom of the screen is a word that says lock in good habits. What's interestingly is whether you have a good habit or a bad habit, it takes you approximately 30 days to create a habit. So when you do something for 30 days in a row, or stop doing something for 30 days in a row, a new habit forms. Whether we know it or not, all over the world, we have either started doing new things for 30 days. We've definitely stopped doing things for 30 to 60 days. As a result, when we come out of this, habits are going to be different and people are going to be different. And so the first thing to remember is that this is going to be something that is very much different than what has happened before. I'll give you sort of an idea of the United States. In the United States, we next week are likely to hit approximately 25% unemployment. So the last time we got a 25% unemployment was sort of the Great Depression. We also have amazingly business changes. So all the movie theaters have closed down, and some of the big movie studios have decided to release movies directly online. So there's a movie in the US called The Trolls, which was released by Universal Studios online about 2 weeks ago. And it has basically sold 5 million downloads at $20 a download. So it's basically sold $100 million worth of tickets at very high margin. And as a result, Universal Studios has basically said, even when the crisis is over, they will simultaneously release movies at home for download and the movie theaters. So AMC, which is the largest movie theater in the United States, today said they will never release a Universal movie at the theater ever again. So you can see just in a little business called movies, how this thing has completely shifted dramatically. And then just think about what it will be look like going to the movie theaters in the future, where you're going to have to wear a mask. You're going to basically have to sit 2 seats away from everybody else, excepting the person you go into. Or if you want to do, just look at what restaurants look like today in Korea, China, and Japan. It'll give you a shock of what restaurants look like once people come back. So I truly believe that society will be very different coming out of this. So how do you actually, it'll be for both good and bad reasons, but it'll be quite a shock. So what are some of the ways to think about this? And then what can we actually do about it? So one of the first ways to think about this is right now, all of us, when we're at home, have an opportunity to address a few things that I have spoken about in my book. So a lot of people have, and the reason my book isn't available in many places is because it's been sold out. But fortunately, in the US market, it's back on Amazon and it's hardcover. The rest of the world, it's available, obviously, in Kindle and Audible where it's available. Is because it appears that my book was written for a post-COVID-19 age. As someone said, you wrote a book that was optimized for the post-COVID age. So I'm going to talk about 6 aspects of the post-COVID age that my book covers, and then I'm going to apply it to what I think you need to think about. So so my book has 12 different chapters, and each chapter is its own book. So think about it as like a Spotify playlist versus a CD with only one good song that you have to listen to 12 times. And one of them is basically, how do you manage teams in distributed places? What happens when your entire team works from home? Now, I did not see COVID-19, but what I began to understand is because technology was going to enable it, it was going to be more likely to happen. So how do you deal with teams there? A second area, which I'll talk about, is how change sucks. So we all think that change is good, but I personally don't like change. I've lived in the same city for 40 years. I worked in the same company for 38. I met my wife when we were 12. It wasn't a child marriage 48 years ago. And so when someone basically tells me that change is good, I say, I'm happy, why don't you change? And what's particularly interesting is people come and tell you to change. They say it's good, but they want you to do it. Change is really difficult, especially because as human beings, you got to learn new things. You make mistakes, all kinds of things happen. On the other hand, while change does suck, irrelevance is even worse. And often if you don't change, you become irrelevant. But change is difficult. And in order to get people to change, there are certain things you need to do. So I'll talk a little bit about that. A third area really is we spend a lot of our time all over the world talking about 2 things. Besides sports and movies and politics, we talk about food and exercise, okay? How much we've eaten, what we've eaten, and have we exercised or not exercised. So we spend a lot of time with what I call our physical operating system. And the physical operating system is extremely important. The reason we are basically all sitting at home is we are trying to make sure that our physical operating system doesn't get a virus and run out of time and die, right? Or get sick. So physical operating systems are extremely important. And we spend a lot of time saying how much we eat, what we exercise. But what separates human beings from monkeys is our minds and not our stomachs. Because we invented fire, we have the energy to build our minds. But we don't spend enough time today thinking about our mental operating system, which is what are we putting in our minds and how are we exercising our minds? And this particular time is a great time to actually learn. Because when you are stuck at home, you save some particular time, travel, a whole bunch of other things. And it's time to basically educate yourself and upgrade your mental operating system. So one is, how do you manage yourself in teams when you're working across screens? How do you manage change? How do you manage to increase your mental operating system? Very, very important. The fourth one is leadership. All of us, whether you are a small business owner, medium business owner, you work in a small business, you work in a large business, I think every individual is a leader. If nothing else, they're a leader of themselves. But they're also a leader of maybe their small teams, leaders of their family, but they're leaders. How do leaders lead with soul in this particular time? What do we look for in leaders, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that too. What do we look for leaders? So I'm going to now talk about this post-COVID age and apply all of these things. So I'm going to start first with what is likely to happen to people coming out of this. Now, because I have grown up in India, I most recently in India in January, and I am somewhat familiar with India, but because I don't live and work there all the time, I'm not as familiar with it, obviously, as everyone who's on this webinar. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've learned from the United States, but I think because it's about humans, it also works in India. I think it works in India, but I'm not 100% sure. You all will know. So here's what this is. The first is everybody is extremely anxious. There's a great deal of anxiety, a human anxiety, and the anxiety is about their health, the health of their loved ones, so anxious. The other is fear. In the US, there is fear about jobs. Will my job be there when you have 25% unemployment? There is fear about, can I pay my bills? Because in the US, in addition to putting people on furlough, many companies have basically imposed 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% salary cuts for 2 to 3 months. So can I pay my bills, right? There's fear. And then there's uncertainty, which is, when will this end, right? When will the lockdown end? What will life look like? So you've got anxiety, fear, and uncertainty. And the word I use broadly for encompassing all of that is a word called fragility. So when we come out of this, you, your customers, your employees, your colleagues will basically be fragile. They may appear not fragile, but I think most people will have this idea of fragility because we have gone through this anxious, fearful, uncertain experience. And so when you have your customers, your consumers, your employees fragile, what are they going to be looking for? So I believe what they will be looking for are the following three things. They will be looking for safety. So do they feel safe? Do they feel safe going to a restaurant, going out, buying your products and services? They'll be looking for safety. Okay. So today in the US, the lockdown is we can still go to grocery stores. So I go to a grocery store with a mask once a week. And the thing that is impossible, it looks like a Russian store, is anything to do with cleaning. So, Lysol or anything that is like Dettol or anything, you don't find it. It's all out, right? Because people are looking to keep themselves safe. So they're buying that. The second thing people will be looking for is security. Can I have financial security? Can I make sure that my family is secure? Can I make sure my future is secure? We're talking about sort of in the webinar with the insurance company. How do I get security? So security will be very important. And the third is, how do I rethink society? Now, in the US, which I know a lot more about because I've lived here, there's been a big argument and there's been a great deal of amazing inequality. Now, in India, there's always been inequality, but to a great extent, there's been a growing middle class. In the United States, there's been a shrinking middle class, and there's been a sort of growth of wealth in the upper classes and many people falling out of the middle class. So there's been inequality. And now there's this entire thing about what has happened with society. So today in the US, 16% of the United States are immigrants, 16%. And obviously, we have a president who doesn't like immigrants. But 16% of the United States is immigrants. 32% of the people who are currently working in hospitals, warehouses, delivering food, the Uber drivers, the people who have to take all the risk and who are still working are immigrants, right? And so people are beginning to understand, what are we doing? What's society looking like? So they're going to look for safety, security, and they're going to think about society. So that's the first thing. So when you look forward into the future, make sure that you are addressing fragility, that your customers, consumers, people, employees are going to be fragile. And how are you going to signal, create, and talk about safety, security, and a more society approach? That's one. The second area coming out of this particular thing is what I basically talk about, which is building resilience. So resilience is having some form of sort of strength, which is, I think, extremely, extremely important as we sort of move into sort of the new world. Resilience is very, very critical. And there are three types of resilience. Now, I do not know. So the first part of it is resilience will basically be about society resilience, which is how can government help people recover from this? So in the US, people were like, government sucks. Now they don't think about it so much. And then right now, government in the US, between opening credit lines and actual investment, has invested $6 trillion, which is pretty interesting. So there'll be the society thing, which is, can we improve healthcare, right? Can we now think about people and communities and other things besides just business and consumers? So there's going to be, how do we make a more resilient society? That I know is definitely happening in the United States. So that's one. Second is, how do we build more resilient businesses, small, medium, or large resilient businesses? So I'll give you sort of an idea of how that works. In the US, there is a company that you all are familiar with because you'll fly their planes, called Boeing. Okay, in fact, the headquarters are here in Chicago, though they make their planes in Seattle. So Boeing already had a particular problem, and their stock price went from $400 a share down to a low of about $90 a share, and somewhere now in the 130, 140 range. And it had to go to government to get money in order to pay its bills. So you have a Boeing corporation that actually paid out stock buybacks of $1.6 billion, but did not have anything on their balance sheet for a hard time. And so people are basically asking, how do you run businesses not expecting hard times? So you're going to basically expect that. Another company that you're familiar with, which is the Disney Corporation, and Disney basically believes that when they will open much smaller. They will have much fewer employees and a much smaller footprint because they need to basically save money. So the whole idea is smaller footprints, stronger balance sheets, rethinking supply chains. This might actually help India. In the US, people are going to basically say, we can't have all of our supply chains in China. We need to have differentiated supply chains. So businesses are going to say different supply chains, stronger balance sheets, smaller footprints, right? How do we rethink things to get resilience? And for individuals and employees, there are three new types of resilience that are going to happen. One, as I had mentioned, is a lot of people have begun to understand that they have to learn new skills because we're entering a new world. So this was this thought about how do you upgrade your mental operating system. The second one, which is extremely important, and this is not necessarily popular, but I've been saying this because I truly believe this. I think in most countries, people are going to come out a little less wealthy than they were coming in, and sometimes much less wealthy. As a result, people have to recognize that they have to cut their cost structure. Like I've told all of my clients, your customers are going to basically be looking for value, and they're going to be spending less because, number one, they stop spending for a while. Number two, they've taken pay cuts. Number three, they've lost money in the stock market. So when they come out, they're not going to say, yay, let's go and spend a whole bunch of money and do a whole bunch of stuff. So how do you manage cost structures, including as an individual? How do you cut some of your budgets? And to a certain extent, if you spend money shopping a lot or going out to eat a lot, you're not doing any of that now because you're sitting at home. Will you actually, or do you have to start all of those again? Because we're moving into a world where you need to have a little bit more flexibility. You need to have a better balance sheet. So that is, increased resilience. That becomes extremely important. About 3 days ago, I wrote the last of this series. So this whole series is called The Great Reinvention. So what I call this post-COVID-19 age is not the Great Recession #2 or the Great Depression. I call it the Great Reinvention. And I call it the Great Reinvention primarily because of what I had basically sort of mentioned to you all, which is that when the entire world has a social, economic, and financial crisis all at the same time for 60 to 90 days, there is nothing but reinvention that is likely to basically appear and occur. And therefore, we have to think about this as the Great Reinvention. So a lot of my clients around the world have basically said, what do we do? And I believe this advice that I am giving will work for any type of company. Now, most of my clients tend to be larger or medium to large companies, but I believe this advice works for small and medium and also well for large companies. And it also works for individuals. And I call it resurrection now, or resurrect now, which is how do you like come up? So the thing that I would basically say, if you're running a small or medium business or a business of just one person or any type of business, here are the things I would really, really ask you to do in the next 4 weeks to be prepared for what is about to come forth. The first thing is to sit with your teams, whether you use Zoom, Skype, Team, Google Hangout, do whatever you want on a visual basis, and basically try to think about how is your customer or your consumer going to be different? What are they going to be doing more of? What are they going to be doing less of? Okay, how are they going to basically be different? It's very, very important, right? Like, I truly believe they're going to be ultra sensitive about health and safety. I believe what Bill Gates says about the future, he doesn't call the future the new normal. He calls the future the semi-normal, that we will go back halfway, 70% to normal, but not 100% to normal. So I think we're going to go from a quarantine state to a semi-quarantine state for about 6 months, right? So I expect people will travel less, they'll go out less, they'll work more from home if they can, and they'll be caring a lot about health and safety. Broadly, that's what I believe. But you have to basically think and ask a simple question. What will my customers be like? And of course, I expect they'll be value driven. What will my customers be like? What will they want more of and less of? It's very, very important to keep that in mind. That's step number one to prepare for this. Step number two is, how can I get my company to learn from and accept the new reality? How can I get my small, medium, or large teams to think about this? And what do I expect that to be? So what are some of the new realities? Reality number one is we're going to have accelerated digitization of business. Businesses are going to get more and more digitized. I'm not saying all businesses are going to be digitized, but this is basically digitizing businesses more and more. And there's going to be the need to have expansion of remote everything, which is the ability to access things increasingly with technology online. India was already doing it, with a whole kinds of things, but you'll see more of that. Second is some areas that we were seeing that were growing a lot will continue to grow, like technology. But other areas that we were seeing that were growing a lot are not going to grow and are going to actually go into a depression state. One area really is hospitality and travel. So I do believe that hotels, restaurants, travel, the hospitality business for 6 to 10 months will be very, very much, half the size of what it was. It'll come back, but it'll be half the size. The third is, I believe there'll be two kinds of businesses that will do very well. Small and medium businesses, because they can basically be focused and agile, like many of you all. And then very large businesses, because very large businesses will have safety, security, balance sheet, and they'll start buying the businesses that were like not very small or medium and not very large, but like in between, that will basically have a whole bunch of particular areas. So one is understand your customer, consumer. Second, understand what the strengths, weaknesses, shocks have been of your business. How has your business endured? What has this shock and these 5, 6, 7 weeks taught to you about your business? And what can you learn from it? But most importantly, step 3. Yes, step 1 is understanding the consumer. Step 2 is doing sort of a SWOT about your business, strength, weakness, opportunity, threats with the shock. The third is rethinking what you do as you come out of this. Now, this is one thing that we can learn from the 2008-2009 recession. And in the 2008-2009 recession, when we came out of it, what we didn't realize that in that furnace, that fire, that bonfire of those 18 to 24 months, completely new companies will be born, completely new companies. So in the US, companies like Uber, now these have all become global companies, Uber, Airbnb, Dollar Shave Club, all these companies were formed in that crisis. Things like social media, all of those took off in that crisis. And as a result, a new period of opportunity and growth occurred. But often existing businesses continued after 2008, 2009 to behave like nothing had changed and there was a problem. Let me explain to you what that is. Coming out of 2008, 2009, the automobile companies continued to basically think they were competing with each other. So GM thought they were competing with Chrysler, with BMW, with Mercedes, etc., right? But really what was happening is three new things had come out of this. One thing was Uber, which basically said you don't have to own a car. The second was Tesla, which said maybe there is a new type of car. And the third, which still hasn't scaled in a great way, was AI, which basically said maybe the car can drive itself, which is self-driving. And in effect, most of those companies lost the opportunity to realize that they had to rethink their business. Similarly, if you use razors or shaving, Gillette versus Schick were competing on how many blades they could add and whether they could heat up the blades or make the blades move with batteries and they were very expensive. Because of social media, because of YouTube, because of price sensitivity, Dollar Shave Club and Harry's launched subscription-based businesses and took away 15 to 20 share points. And Gillette had to write down, or P&G had to write down $15 billion of valuation. So one of the key things coming out of this is what new opportunities, what new competitors, what new customer signals are going to happen for your category. And sometimes your future competitors may not be your current competitors. Your category might be very different coming out of this than going through. And I believe what you should do is rethink your business, keeping only three things in mind, or three constraints. One constraint is whatever you do has to be legal. The second is whatever you do has to be scientific and technically possible today, not some science fiction technology. And third is it needs to make money in 3 years or less. So you have to have obviously an economic constraint, but it doesn't have to make money in 2 months or less. And because that's what your competitors are, the next generation of companies who start with fresh sheet of paper are going to say, how do we take opportunity of this? And their only constraint is legal. At some particular stage, their venture capital people will say, we want to make money. And it basically has to be scientifically and technically possible. So how do you rethink parts of your business? And often what I would suggest you do is, if you remember Andy Grove said something called only the paranoid will survive, which is what he basically said when he was running Intel. One of the reasons Intel for the last 10 years has done very badly is because that's a stupid strategy for a connected world. When we're living in a connected internet world, paranoia means everybody's the enemy, which is pretty stupid. I truly believe the right thing is only the schizophrenic will thrive, which is companies should run two models. One model optimized for today to make sure they make the numbers, and one model starting with a fresh sheet of paper optimized for tomorrow, which is what I've been saying you need to basically do. And in order to do that, one thing remember is you've got people. And remember I told you change sucks. And even you as a leader might find it hard to change. You can make change happen by basically facing reality, being continuously communicating to your people why they need to change. But the two most important things are you need to incentivize change. You need to pay them. Maybe in the initial term, you may not be able to do it with money, but you should be able to pay them with increased responsibility, authority, opportunity so that they will actually change. Because if you tell people to change but don't give them an incentive to change, they will not change. And the other thing besides incentives is training. Right? People can't suddenly start doing new things unless you don't provide training. So often when people, and I work with a lot of CEOs of companies, and they say, we want to change. So I said, okay, where's your incentive system? Where is your training system? Sending out a press release isn't going to make anything happen, right? So how do you change is very, very important as we move forth. And then also, how are you designed? One of the things I say in my book is the future does not fit in the containers of the past. Often business design, your company design might be wrong the way you're organized. So you have to think very differently. I'm going to sort of end and open it up with, to questions with just a, sort of a few sort of ending thoughts. And those are the following. The first is, we are in a very difficult and challenged time today because of COVID-19. However, it will pass. And I truly believe that because of globalization, which in many ways there is some, sort of Western sort of pushback against it, and there's maybe like a Chinese flavor and an Indian flavor and a US flavor or whatever it is. But globalization can't be stopped, because the reality of it is, I explained to my Western friends, is if you take all of Western Europe and the United States and Canada and Mexico, all of those people combined have less than the population of India or China. And by the way, India and China with 2 billion people, but with China's population declining and India's at some particular stage stabilizing, together will be basically less than Africa, where Africa is going to be, by 2050, 2 billion people, and 2100, 4 billion people. So even in today's world of 7 billion people, 800 million people can't tell the 6.2 billion people what to do. Globalization is going to be fine, but it isn't going to necessarily have a Western flavor, and it'll have different flavors. So I believe globalization will continue, but with a different flavor, because the reality of it is, whether it's COVID-19, which doesn't stop at a border, or the internet, yes, I understand the Great Firewall, or talent, or ideas, they don't basically sit because someone drew a line where a river or a mountain pass was. Okay, so globalization is going to happen. Obviously, there'll be local rules, localization, but globalization. I believe demographic shifts are going to continue to happen. And in many countries, including India, which is increasingly a young country, versus China, which is increasingly an old country, I think that's going to benefit. And I think the next generation is going to be great. And so I'm very positive about that. And the third is technology. And I do believe technology is a pretty amazing thing. Yes, it can do bad things, but I do believe the world with technology is a better world than without technology. So when people don't believe in facts, reality, science, or technology, I basically ask them a very simple thing. Why don't you put off all the electricity in your house, don't go to a hospital, and don't use a car, right? Because if you're anti-science and anti-technology, I want you to basically sit in a house without plumbing, without electricity, not even in the house, without an automobile. That's what you are when you don't believe in science and technology and data and reality, right? And once I say that, all these idiots stop, like who are anti the future. So the future is coming whether we like it or not, and I always believe it's brighter. What people don't realize is it's much better. Obviously, this year is far, but I thought it was much better to be alive in December 2019 than in December 1999. And I think if you think about how much advances have happened, it is much better, including in countries like India, much better. So we have to think positively about where the future is, and address and prepare for the future. And so with that, I will open it up for questions. If you want to learn more about all the crazy shit I think about and what I talk about, you can follow me on Twitter, which is at Rishad, R-I-S-H-A-D, at Rishad, very simple. Or reach out to me in LinkedIn. I accept all and every connection. And thank you very much. And I'll open it up for questions. Rakesh?
Thank you, Rishad. It was a very insightful 40 minutes, and I didn't want to stop listening to you. I didn't realize that we're already 40 minutes into the conversation, but very thought-provoking ideas there, Rishad. And like I said, there is so much more to hear. We got some set of questions, but thank you very much for what you shared with us, Rishad. Before I take the questions from the audience, there is just one question that was going on in my mind when you mentioned about fragility, in the state of mind. So my question is that most organizations are not used to self-destruction, right? We're not used to breaking down our processes and systems in the normal course of time. And you spoke of the need for fresh thinking. So what should be the starting point for these organizations and for for individuals also? How might they kickstart this process, Rishad, in these times?
So what I've been doing a lot of this. In fact, next week I'm doing it with 3 boards of global companies, and this is the process that I suggest that they all follow. And everything I think about, I write on Twitter or LinkedIn or on my blog. So all my stuff is completely free and usable. So that's the interesting thing, which people also find very unusual, because my basic belief is intellectual capital wants to be free, right? So with that being said, here are the things that I strongly suggest people do. The first thing you do is this. I ask boards to think about not their category, but another category. Or I ask leaders to think about a category that's not theirs, but another category that has been disrupted in some way. And they always find one, right? They'll always basically find something. And I say, let's understand what happened there. And when they do that exercise, the next thing I say is any of that applicable to your business? And immediately they say, yes, it is. Because when you ask someone to criticize themselves, they become very defensive, right? Because I built this. So don't tell me what I built is weak. But if you look at another category and say, how did this company that you admired, right, begin to go wrong? What were some of those things? Now, when you have those things, do any of these apply to you? And it's very hard for someone to say none of them apply to you. So the first is to not basically think about your own business, but to think about businesses that were very successful, that declined, right? And in every category, you basically see that. You see Nokia, right? Nokia was amazing in phones. BlackBerry, amazing in phones, right? Industry after industry, company after company, you see companies destroyed. So you look at that, what were they doing? So, and then are they applicable to you? The second thing is this. What I asked them to do, and this is actually true, right? So I'm not asking people to become drunk or anything of the sort, but I basically tell people to have a couple of drinks. So I do this like in the evening. And then I say, now let's imagine that you had all the assets of your company, every asset, any asset you want, right? And none of the disadvantages of your company. And for many companies, it's like we're too big, or we have this stupid client that we can't get rid of, or whatever it is. Okay, there's a thing. So assuming you have all your assets, but you have none of your liabilities, build a new company, right? And they do. And then I say, why can't you actually build that company? Because your competitor, you've just shown me how a competitor can beat you. Because your competitor has none of your liabilities, right? But on the other hand, as every client tells me, but they have none of my assets. So I said, yes, you are so fixated on your liabilities as constraints to change, you don't understand the wonderful thing you've got in your assets, right? That you can leverage for change. But as long as you don't do that, your next generation competitors are going to basically, without those liabilities, right, try to find ways to come with your assets. And what are one of the assets? One of the assets that a company has, and in fact, I believe the single most important asset a company has, is its talent, is the people who work there, right? Obviously, they have patents and brand name and reputation and all of that, but nothing is as important as talent, right? And my basic belief is when worlds change, talent wants to go to companies where they particularly grow. And so, A, look outside and then see how those lessons can be inside, because then you get less defensive. B is think about how would you redesign a company if you had all your assets and your liabilities. And you'll actually then find that your liabilities may not be as bad, or some of these liabilities you have to sort of address. I'll give you an idea of a company that, one of the things which is a funny joke, and since I'm talking primarily to Indians, and I say this in the US and whatever. So my whole thing is, hey, listen, the only way the United States technology industry is being saved is because of Indians, okay? So the head of IBM, the head of Adobe, the head of Google, the head of Microsoft were all Indians, okay? But I said, now let me just show you one particular thing. A company that was a great company that then had 10 years of no stock price growth and almost no growth, Microsoft. Okay, so Microsoft during the Obama years for 10 decades, its stock price stayed around $30, $30 to $35 continuously for 10 years. And Steve Ballmer basically had the following mindsets. And I saw him, I even met him. This is his mindset. Number one, the world is about Windows. Number two, things like Linux and open systems suck, right? Number three is we embrace and conquer. We basically, they would release vaporware about products that never occurred, right? They would piss in other people's marketplaces. They do all kinds of things. Okay, stock price, nothing happened. Inside the company, it was highly competitive. They would do stack ranking, and the bottom 20% were kicked out. So then comes Satya Nadella, comes flying in. Now he's been there for 20 years, so he doesn't come flying in, he gets promoted, okay? The first thing he does is he gives everybody a book called Growth Mindset, or all of his leadership. And he says, we've got to stop going from a know-it-all mindset to being into a growth mindset. So Carol Dweck, who's written the book, her agent is the same as my agent, which is why now that's why he took my book, right? So hopefully you should buy my book. So he basically said, read this and to his people. He then basically said, you know what, he bought GitHub, which was all about open. He embraced Linux, right? He says, I'm going to focus on enterprise, small, medium, and enterprise, and not as much on the consumer. So outside of Xbox, right, he isn't really much into the consumer, right? He's much into that. I'm going to go more into the cloud. But here's what he also did. There is no Windows division. He closed it, right? So if you thought everything, this legacy, it has to be Windows, closed. We have to be all about not being partner in open system, closed. We have to be, similarly, when Shantanu Narayan, who I know and who's basically quoted in my book and has endorsed my book at the back, who's the head of Adobe, he basically, he took the decision to basically say, I'm going to go from shrink-wrapped software like Photoshop, which I sell for $400 once, every 3-4 years, and I'm focusing on creativity. I'm going to go from that. I'm going to expand my business. I'm going to buy companies like Omniture and a whole bunch of things, and I'm going to go to experiences. I'm going to basically go to a subscription model that sells on the cloud, right, which is Adobe Cloud, Adobe Marketing Cloud. And here's what he basically did. His stock price basically declined to approximately $30 from $60 or $70 when he did that for a year, right? And he says, I don't care about retail. I don't care about statecraft. I don't care about this. Today, before COVID-19, and his stock price is somewhat recovered already, before COVID-19, just before this happened, his company had a $375 stock price, and it was the second most valuable enterprise company in the world after Microsoft, ahead of Oracle, ahead of SAP, right? So what I basically say is world-class companies with much more problems have reinvented, which basically means you have no excuse not to reinvent.
Thanks, Rishad. And you spoke of talent. That sort of segues into the next logical question that we've got, which is you also spoke of skills and upgrading mental operating system. So the question to you is, what, according to you, are the top skills for for people at various levels? So what are the top skills that you see people should focus on at the entry level, at mid level, and then at senior levels to remain resilient in post COVID-19 age?
Okay, so the first 3 points I'm going to make is for all 3 levels. Okay, so there are 3 things that are common for all levels. And the first one is, as we were discussing earlier today, you must spend 1 hour every day learning. Learning is perpetual. You don't stop learning when you stop a training program or you stop going to school. You have to learn, and the reason you have to learn is how fast the world is changing. So most people will have a 50-year career. In the US, the average company presence in the S&P 500 is 12 years, right? Which basically means your career will outlive most companies. And that's the rate of change that we're basically dealing with. So you have to continue to basically learn. So you must invest an hour a day learning, right? And you might say, well, I don't have an hour a day. Well, you spend at least an hour a day doing stupid things like social media or a whole bunch of other things. Do 1 hour a day learning. That's number one. Number two is try to do one new thing every day, right? Why do I say new thing? Because whenever you do something new, you're actually alive. So just like, when you're traveling and you suddenly find yourself in a new city or a new country, you're actually paying attention. Even when you're traveling and your itinerary gets canceled, you start paying attention, right? So you actually pay attention when something new happens. And, today when we're locked at home, it could be watch a new movie, try to have a conversation with someone you've not had for the last few days. Do something new once a day. And the third, and this is the most hard, right? And this is the reason, by the way, I got my job 40 years ago, which is when I graduated from the University of Chicago, I was only one of 2 Indians graduating from the University of Chicago Business School. This year, because I now underwrite a scholarship at the University of Chicago, 48 Indians will graduate. Okay, so from 2 to 48. But in 1982, I was one of 2, and they didn't set us up for us. So it was really hard to get a job. I had no green card, I had a trading visa, etc. One company gave me a job, and they gave me a job. And by the way, I spent my entire career in that silly place because no one else would give you a job for 38 years. But one company gave me a job, and they gave me a job not because of my amazing good looks, but they gave me a job because I wrote an essay. So what had happened is you had to send your resume and an essay. And my essay was build a case for the exact opposite of what you think is true. Okay. And so what I suggest to people is whenever you believe something, whenever you're recommending something to your boss, whenever if you're a boss, you're going to do something, build a case for why the exact opposite of what you're recommending is true. And why that's important is that's the only way. And if you can't build a strong case, I'm not sure you actually know what the hell you're recommending. So I recommend, and when I was working full-time at Publicis, and I still, yesterday I spent 30 minutes with the CEO. As an advisor, I'm spending a lot of time, is he says, okay, build a case for the exact opposite of what I'm recommending. And I always do that, right? And sometimes I build such a strong case, he said, do you think I should not do it? I said, no, you should do it, but I'm just showing you how I can show you why it can't work, right? And eventually you have to basically make a decision. And the reason why that's very important is we're living also increasingly in a polarized world. Without us knowing it, most of the media we consume, the friends we have, the people who gather around us are people who are like us or who think like us, right? So your social media feed, your Google page, the people you hang out at home with, many of your friends, they're all like you. And all of you all basically have become incestuous. And incest basically gives rise to diseased children and bad ideas, okay? So the whole idea is if you can't think outside the box and get other people to come in, so those are the 3 things. Spend 1 hour learning, try to do one new thing a day, and then when you have to make decisions, build the opposite. That's true for everybody, right? And how to do that and all of that, I've both written about, and there's an entire chapter in my book just on that. Now, for small, medium, and large, there's other things you want to do. Or not small, medium, and large, young, middle, and older. So for young people, there are 2 things I would tell you. Number 1 is find the least sucky job you can, and please do not open your job with jobs that basically pay the most money. The biggest mistake you can make is doing something you don't want because of money. Because what you're basically now then doing is you start living at that particular lifestyle, and therefore you will have priced yourself out of your dreams, right? And you cannot be successful unless you love what you do and you are passionate about what you do. And early on, for the first 4 or 5 years, you may not even know what that is. It'll be sucky kind of jobs because when you're young in the company, everybody gives you all the crap stuff. So when I hear about things about like, I'm going to find my vision and mission and belief, I said, like, give me a break. How the hell do you know that when you're 25 or 30? Give me a break, okay? Like, stop it. So that's the whole thing. Get realistic, make 2, 3, 4 year decisions, etc. In the middle, what's very important is mentoring. Find mentors, right? Find people who will give you good feedback. Find people who can guide you. It's very, very important. Mentorship is a great way of learning, right? And you'd be surprised how you can reach out and people will mentor you. They think it's an honor. Just say, hey, can you help me? So that's the, but don't look for, I was going to ask them like, give me a job. That's not the mentorship. Mentorship is give me advice, show me, right? And it's very simple. Hey, can I have a lunch with you once every 3 months? Can I have coffee with you or something like that? These days, I guess, can I have Zoom? And by the way, these are good days to start mentors because most of the people who can be mentors are sitting at home and no one's calling them. So, it's a good thing to do. The third is for the older people, which is like people like myself who are past our sell-by date. Okay, so the thing that we have to remember is this, that it's very, very important to start unlearning. Okay, so for older people, learning is unlearning, which is some of the things that we have believed. The world has changed so much that they're no longer true. I'm not talking about ethical things like what's good or what's bad or treating people, but there are some things. So I'll give you an idea. In the advertising and media business, for a long, long time, the belief basically was that you wanted to reach lots of people often, and mass media was the way to do it, and we use segmentation. Use television and print and radio, and you basically, I know I'm talking to a country where people don't eat beef much, but I'm going to talk of this way. The way you started, we would start with a cow and we would hack at it till we got a steak. Okay, so that was the way we did stuff. But then there was a new world order with things like Google and YouTube, etc., where you basically began to get crowds of 1 and 2 and 3, and then you would aggregate them. So you could buy, 5,000 people who typed in Toyota on Google, right? So that was called reaggregation. So in the old day it was segmentation, now it's reaggregation, completely different models. But here's the other model. In the old days, I would basically decide and I would negotiate a price with the media company. Today, there's a bidding model where I bid against each other for inventory on Facebook, on WhatsApp, on Facebook, on Snap, on anything else. So I have an auction model. So everything I learned about the media business in my first 20 years, the exact reverse is happening today. And if I hadn't figured this out, I'd still be saying stupid things or even more stupid things than I currently say, right? So when you're senior, you have to unlearn. So young people, make sure you find the least sucky job, try to find what you're passionate about, be patient. Middle people, get mentors. Senior people, unlearning is a form of learning.
Awesome. So, Rishad, I've got questions pouring out of my screen, it seems. So I'm just going to...
I thought you were going to say pouring out of your skin. That would have been great.
Pretty much that there only. So I'm going to just focus on the ones which I feel you've not sort of addressed so far, right? So Rishad, you mentioned about Microsoft and Satya, and I've sort of been seeing his interviews. One of the things that strike me about Satya is that he's so unassuming. He's he's almost sort of happy exposing his vulnerabilities, and he's come as you are as a leader, right? And that sort of draws people to him. So the question I'm sort of joining this with what Monica Shah wants to ask is, what's the role of communication in these times with employees, and how leaders need to sort of focus on communication that connects with employees in these situations, given that these are uncertain times and employees are obviously worried about their jobs and so on and so forth.
Yes. So a key area here are, if people are taking notes, this is the time to basically write down 5 words, okay? Or you could buy my book, but or read my blogs, you'll find these 5 words. But here are the 5 words that I want you to make. There's a chapter in my book called How to Lead with Soul, right? And I've spent a lot of time focusing on people like Satya Nadella, like Shantanu Narayan, who I know, like all the great leaders I've seen around the world. I've done a lot of research, and I've brought it down to 5 words. And those 5 words work particularly well today in the COVID-19 age. And the first one is capability. You want to, when you communicate with people, show that you are still a professional who is sort of capable, right? So to a great extent, capability becomes extremely important, which is, am I talking to someone who's capable? The second one is integrity. And by integrity, which means when you are communicating, are you looking and are you being trustworthy? Are you using data? Are you using facts? Are you basically based on reality or some sort of imagination? Because integrity in communication, and that's, trust is part of it, transparency is part of it, data is part of it, integrity. So capability, if you look at Satya Nadella, you basically say the guy knows his shit. He created Azure, right? Integrity, guy seems to be goddamn honest and transparent. I like that. Okay, and this is, by the way, true for a lot of leaders, but I'm just using him as an example. The third is empathy. Okay, empathy is very important because what do other people think? What are they feeling? Now, in today's world, why that's very important is, remember, people who are at home are anxious, uncertain, fearful, this whole idea of fragility. So understanding where they come from and and empathy becomes important. So when you have meetings with people and you have announcements, also make sure you have conversations. So empathy. The fourth is vulnerability, right? And vulnerability is both I myself have issues, but I may not know all the answers, right? And one of the very interesting things is that this combination of empathy and vulnerability, for instance, Satya has talked a lot about his son, right? Who basically has some learning and other difficulties. And how when he was born, he actually was very unhappy as to why God made a child like this for him. I mean, it's in his book, okay? So the vulnerability. And the last one is inspiration, which is, hey, the future is bright, right? Follow me, right? The world is going to get better. So those 5 characteristics are what I believe every single person, remember at the beginning, I basically talked about change and operating system. The one thing I was talked about how to lead with soul. And this thing about leading with soul are the 5 characteristics and use these. So anytime you now see anybody, think about these 5. When you communicate, think about these 5. And not all of us are perfect. Most of us, on a bad day aren't so good at these things. But try to get better at these 5 because that's the way I would communicate and also lead. And they will be good any time, any market, any industry, any country.
I'm going to remind my audience of a key takeaway from the last question that I asked Rishad. And he mentioned that 1 hour every day you must spend on learning. So I just want to remind our audience that you've done more than 1 hour today. So keep pace with us and keep watching this space. Make sure that you learn with us. And this possibly is the best way to learn, coming from such great business leaders and thinkers. So Rishad, the next question is from Apur Bansal. It's comment essentially, and I'm just trying to rephrase this into a question. And the question possibly is as follows: that how should government, and this is India, right? How should the Indian government maintain balance between economic liberalization and national sovereignty, given that there is an opportunity now for global supply chains to be reoriented, and this could be an opportunity for India. So, how do you think this will pan out for the for us as a country, and how should governments be responding to this situation?
So I'm going to use the first one word for this, which is called optionality. So one of the things I always advise people is we're living in a world, as we know, which is constantly changing and has lots of shocks and excitement. And so to a great extent, you want to basically not have one answer, one silver bullet, you want options, right? So optionality. And that's part of my whole thing about schizophrenic, which is prepare for today and prepare for tomorrow. So optionality is, I believe, that India as a country by itself is bigger than most countries gathered together, right? So India itself, both because of its languages, its people, its everything else, its religion things, etc. It's a very complicated, basically, country. And so there are some unique and amazingly things that have to be very specific to India. On the other hand, India's growth between 1990 and now has been primarily driven in great part because of globalization. Okay, in great part because of both the ability to both export, including the Infosys and Wipros, etc. of the world, open to globalization, which is to a certain extent. Make no mistake. Yes, China basically has Tencent and Alibaba, and we're going to try to create our geos and everything else. Okay, but there is a reason that I think Indians are permeated all over the world is because we are working on global operating systems, right? The Googles and Facebooks, and hopefully, Geo will become global, etc. So our opportunities and a lot of our growth has come from global, and the supply chain and other things will also come in. And for that, we basically have to make sure we have a rule of law on copyright and other protection, which China does not have. And the other thing that we think is very important, and I'm basically pro every country, pro India, pro China, and I used to spend a lot of time in China. In fact, I've been to Wuhan 3 times, but only the last time 5 years ago. Okay, but one of the key things that I think is really important is that unless India balances both, and if it turns into any particular extreme, I don't think India will succeed. Which is that India just becomes, it's all about globalization and all about wealth creation. It'll both have a revolution. But right now, the concern for India is the other way, right? Which is a lot of countries today are becoming more nationalistic, right? And that is the thing that's to a certain extent disturbs me, because the reality of it is no country is so important that the rest of the world needs it, right? And you're going to see that. You're going to see people detour around parts of China. And when you see that, make no mistake, if the world is far more invested in supply chains and a whole bunch of stuff in China than it is in India. And if they're starting to detour, and I see this in boardrooms, people are really starting to think, hey, these people are giving us trouble. What do we do? And they've got much more at risk, right? So that's the key thing, not to basically get so jingoistic about India. And by the way, well, I've become a US citizen, I'm very Indian at heart, right? So I'm all for India, all of that stuff. But hey, at some particular stage, recognize when this becomes politics versus reality.
Okay. I'm going to take, and I'm cognizant of your time as well, Rishad. I'm going to take 2-3 more questions.
Sure.
This one is interesting. So you, since you're a communication expert, been advising publicists for a long time. And the question is that customer behavior is bound to change given the situation, and you sort of alluded to it in your talk as well. So how should advertisement change for companies? What is it that they need to do to stay real and to stay in the game?
So this is true all the time, but particularly now, is think about advertising more about what you do and rather than what you say. So even when you're communicating what you did versus what you promise you will do. So for instance, I'll give you an idea and then I'll give you a word. I'll give you the word first. So whenever you think of any kind of messaging, any kind of advertising, or any kind of marketing, so small and medium people might not have big advertising budgets, but they have marketing or some sort of selling. The word I would ask you to think about is SAVE, save, right? So S is, are you offering a solution? A is, are you making your product accessible? So is it available everywhere in every kind of form, right? So I'm a little upset that my book is only available now on Kindle in India. So you don't need the Kindle, but you need the Kindle app, right? While in the US, I have it available on 5 platforms. But it just so happens it's sold out in the book form. We don't have the others. But can you make it accessible? Because people want to try this. A. V is value and values. Are you offering value, and what's the values of your company? And E is experience. What is it like to do business with your company? What is it like to experience your product and service? What is it like to experience your employees? Remember, your number one form of marketing is your employees. People interact with your employees. Your employees go tell their friends about your company when they have drinks, okay? So your employees become important. So SAV, solution, access, value, employees. Now, I take that and I basically sort of apply it to today's advertising. And I'm now going to use it because I don't see much advertising, but when I see it, I see a lot of the curated stuff, which I get, even though I go from my company, they show me the stuff. So I've been looking at that. So the ones that work, and I'm going to talk about car industry. Okay. So in the US, there are car companies that are advertising the following. They're basically saying, you can shop for a car online now. And we will, when you want to, and we will come with the car to your house so you can test drive the car, right? And we're just making the whole car buying process much easier. Now that, I believe, is bad advertising. Okay, I'll explain to you why. That's number one. The number two, what people are basically saying is they talk about the legacy of the car company and how much they would like to help you and how long they've been. So piano music starts, they show fields, they say since 1918 or 1955, we've been around, we are solid, we've been there for the community, we've been here. Bad advertising. Okay, that's what most of the advertising is. Let me tell you what good advertising is. Auto. So in the US, and I'm pretty sure it's true in India, but I don't know the Indian market, but in the US and Western market, most people don't buy their cars outright. They basically buy it on a monthly payment plan, right? They pay it off. They have a car payment over 48 months, 60 months, etc. So what is my problem right now as a person? I'm fragile. What am I worried about? I'm worried about my finances, right? I've either been laid off or I'm earning less money. So what I'm thinking about is how do I make my car payment? So another car company came up with this ad. This is a very difficult time to basically make car payments. You have bought our car and you are part of our family. For the next 3 months, you do not have to make your car payments. Okay? We will just add it on to the end of it. So for the next 3 months, don't worry about it. We're not giving you the 3 months of money back, but we're basically saying next 3 months, don't worry about it. Nothing's going to happen to your credit report. You don't have to pay for it. We'll just add it to the end of your term. Okay? That is fantastic. Now, let's talk about insurance. Okay? Now, this might get me into trouble, but let me talk about insurance. I'm talking about 2 insurance companies in the United States. So one insurance company is the one that I happen to use for my automobile insurance, which is State Farm. One happens to be a client of mine or a client of my company's, which is called Allstate. Okay. Now, the only reason I happen to have State Farm auto insurance is when I first started driving a car in 1982, Allstate would not take on new drivers. Right. So I went to my client and they said, we don't take on new drivers. So I took on State Farm, which was the only company that was willing to take with me on. And you can understand I'm very loyal. If somebody helps me, like Leo Burnett, when I didn't have a job, I remained true to them. Right. So, but here's the key thing. Allstate began to advertise that they were going to send money back to all Allstate auto owners because people were not driving for 6 to 8 weeks. And therefore, their claims had declined. And they said, we want to give some money back to you because we don't have those claims, right? Because we expected you'd be driving 2,000 miles that month, but you're driving nothing. So we want to give money back. I had to call State Farm and say, what about me? Right? They said, what are you talking about? I said, look, I saw this Allstate ad. They're giving money back. I'm not driving. I have the same thing. They said, why do you want your money back? I said, because I'm not driving and Allstate's giving their money back. And they said, okay, well, I guess we have to. Very different experience. I may have cost you money, but whatever.
I hope people have skipped that part. Okay, so I'm going to just call out a few names so that our audience know that we've seen the questions. So Saurabh Chaudhary, your question, I think Rishad, I'm going to have to request you to sort of go through the session after we're done with it. They will be recording and you will get answer to your question in terms of how might the society change and, what would be changing in people and the way we behave and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and one of the things is if you go to rishadt.wordpress.com or just Google me, you'll find, if you just Google Rishad Tobaccowala, you'll find it. So rishadt.wordpress.com has got 4 or 5 pieces I've recently written where some of this thing I've been talking about has come from. So you can see the notes out there and you have that anyway.
Yes, and that's pretty insightful. I've gone through those blogs and that's highly advisable for our audience to go and have a look at the blogs that Rishad has written. They're very, very informative. Okay, maybe one last question, Rishad, from Shaz. Is it a good time for startups to start up?
It is a good time for startups to start up, assuming 2 things. It is a terrific time because this is when a lot of new companies and new industries get formed because of 2 reasons. One is the marketplace has changed as I've described. And second is consumer behavior has changed and people are expecting different things. And just like after 2008, 2009 gave birth to a lot of startups. So that's really good. It's a difficult time for startups unless you've already been funded. Okay? Because what's basically happened is a lot of venture capital companies have basically become much more cautious about investing because of the environment that we're basically in, and also because they've been significantly damaged in other places. So if you basically think about it, a lot of them are like really worried about some of the investments they may have made, because many of those investments were made in companies that were growing fast but making no money. So if you think about SoftBank, right? The SoftBank Vision Fund, which I basically call the SoftBank Delusion Fund, right? So the SoftBank Delusion Fund, almost everything they've invested in is stupid. WeWork, oil, stupidest model in the entire world. Okay, stupid, right? But even amazing companies like Airbnb had to raise money at 11% interest rate, okay? Because in effect, the whole market structure has changed. Think about Airbnb. Just think about it. Number one, people are traveling less, right? So am I going to go to Airbnb? Two, I'm looking for safety and security. Am I going to go into a home which I've never, I don't know if it's clean. Now, Airbnb says they've now said they're going to have 24 hours between, but who's cleaning? I don't know. But at the same time, guess what happens with hotels? Hotels have 30% capacity. So every hotel room, which will be run by major companies that will keep it clean, will be cheaper than any Airbnb. So your competitive threat has changed. Your reason for travel has changed. And more importantly, I, as an Airbnb owner, now begin to realize that this is becoming really strange. So I'm not going to actually now rent out my apartment day by day to Airbnb. I'm just going to give it on rent. So their supply is down, their demand is down, their competitive stuff is down. And you will come to understand that Airbnb should have gone public 2 years ago. Year after year, they delayed, right? So a lot of these venture capital companies are really hurting, really hurting. So as a startup, if you can get funded, getting funded is a little bit more difficult, but the time to launch, yes. So if you've got funding, go for it. Beautiful time.
Awesome, Rishad. So there's one question for me. I'm going to intrude into your private space here, since you spoke of startups and funding. And if you were an investor, which I'm sure you are, which is that one sector that you would want to put your money on today?
So there are three sectors that I actually am spending a lot of my time. So while I'm not, the three. So one where I'm doing my own, sort of investment in sort of private companies. It's more like me joining boards and other kinds of stuff, are basically where you are combining artificial intelligence or voice or IoT. So what I call the third connected era, where we're connecting to, if the first connected era was basically connecting to e-commerce or information, which was Google and Amazon, and the second was connecting all the time, which is the phone, or to everybody, which was social, all of which continue. This new era is connecting to the cloud, connecting by voice, data connecting to data, which is AI, or things connecting to things, which is IoT. I think that's the next generation. So in that, I'm focusing a lot, basically, initially on companies that combine humanity, which is what I call AI, machines, which is AI, plus humanity. So I'm in companies like Dumbstruck, which basically uses technology to understand people's emotions and make ads better, for instance, right? So those are things. Broader, which is forgetting about that, in a broader area, I think the three areas that are very, very important where you can actually invest in the stock market. So I'm now talking about the United States stock market, but I'm sure that's available in India equivalent, is I believe 5G is going to be very big, right? So just like Geo was very big for India, I think 5G is tremendous. I've seen it. So 5G, in addition to having, very low sort of fallback, it also, the speed is approximately 100 times plus of 4G. Which people don't realize how that changes stuff, right? Which is, it's pretty remarkable. So 5G, like Qualcomm and Skyworks and Micron and a whole bunch of other things. That's one area. The other one is health, but particularly genetic biotechnology health. So one of the sectors that has done pretty well despite COVID-19 is actually healthcare, especially biotech. Because the importance of biotech becomes extremely important. And we've now understood that if you can close an economy because people want to stay alive, it's staying alive is very important. So biotechnology is the sort of a second area. So 5G, privately is where AI meets emotion, but 5G, biotech is a second area. And the third area that I think is very, very sort of important is technology that allows remote everything, right? So it's basically going into a where you don't have to. So for instance, things like the Venmo happens to be part of a different company. But what happens is now when you go to a restaurant, people are the whole idea of like giving a card and putting a card in there and all of that. They're going to just say, "Hey, Venmo me." Okay, so Venmo the check, etc. So anything to do with remote, working from home, right? The Zooms, etc. of the world. Now it's very high price, but anything remote. So remote, biotech, 5G.
Great. So that was for our audiences and entrepreneurs amongst you and the budding ones as well. You got your answers and you know where to reach Rishad if you have an idea in one of the three sectors. So please reach out to him with the sound business model.
Yes, it's at Rishad or Rishad at Tobaccowala at LinkedIn.
For our other audiences who are looking for building a career and looking for identifying areas of growth, these are the sectors that you may want to focus on and build skills on that. So with that, Rishad, as much as I hate to say goodbye, but I guess we've taken a whole lot of your time.
Well, we've taken time of our audience, and hopefully I didn't put them to sleep, and hopefully they will all have a wonderful dinner.
If I go by the engagement that I'm seeing on my screen here, I think people can do with more, but it is just absolutely awesome to have you with us, Rishad, and I can't thank you enough for coming here. And
absolutely, and for all of you all who can, go onto Amazon and buy my book, and follow me on Twitter, and hopefully this will continue.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rishad, and thank you everybody for being with us. And stay safe, stay happy.
Bye-bye.
Bye.